My name is Malone. I'm the head of outreach for Beyond Autism. And if you are seeing me, you are here to hear about my PowerPoint, my lunch and learn on how to make effective policy, provision and practice for inclusion. Based on my experiences, which I'll go through in a moment, and the recent updates from the Education Committee from Parliament. So if you're seeing me live, hello, it's nice to see you. You can ask questions in the chat, and I will try to get to them at the end. I have had some questions in advance, so thank you for those. I will do my best to get through those as well. If I can't get to your question, please don't worry. Please email us at outreach@beyondautism.org.uk, and I will do my best to arrange to either answer your question or speak to you. And I run an Ascend clinic every Friday from 2 till 5 p.m. for parents, educators, anyone that needs my support. So I am going to start sharing a PowerPoint now, and my very helpful colleague Alice is helping me with this. This is a new way that we're running Lunch and Learns. If you've been to our Lunch and Learns before, it's previously been a different setup, and we're trying to make this a bit more conversational. So if there's any technical issues, I apologize in advance. We're doing our very best. So hopefully you will be seeing a PowerPoint with my face on, regrettably, and it should say "Send in the Classroom, Building Inclusive Policy, Practice and Provision." So I hope that you are seeing that okay. I won't be able to see you or your questions at this time while I'm sharing, so forgive me. I will do my best to come to those at the end. So I'm going to start by just setting out some objectives, looking at what we might hope to achieve in this session. I'll be exploring the importance and interaction between policy, provision, and practice in meeting the needs of SEN learners. So how those three areas of school provision overlap and how they interact with each other to create an inclusive environment. So I'll start with an introduction about myself and my team. I've only got half an hour, 5 minutes of which has gone already, so I won't be able to do an in-depth review, but I'll be looking very quickly at some of the recommendations from the Education Committee report, solving the crisis in SEND, and giving some brief notes on the direction of travel from there. I'll then look at some common points of friction in the classroom, how to deliver ordinarily available provision in the mainstream classroom, and then I will look at some questions that have come through specifically, and hopefully have enough time for a little summary at the end. So, an introduction. For those of you that haven't joined us for a Lunch and Learn before, who are Beyond Autism and who are the Beyond Autism Outreach Team? So I've got some pictures here of my team. I've got Hannah from top left to right and bottom. I've got Hannah, Rachel, Carrie and Cynthia, all of whom are my behaviour consultants who have extensive experience in supporting schools with young people with autism and SEND needs. Our job is to take the strategies we've developed in our special schools, our outstanding special schools, and support mainstream and any other setting that's supporting SEND learners to deliver those strategies in a way that benefits their young people. My experience, I started as a teaching assistant about 14 or 15 years ago in a special educational needs school, and very much fell in love with the practice, became a qualified teacher, taught in mainstream, taught in special, then began working for local authorities to support where there was a breakdown in placement, whether that was because needs couldn't be met from an EHCP or behavioural concerns or many, many reasons. My job was essentially to try and make those with additional needs to have a better quality of experience in their school settings. And I did that in various capacities for about 4.5 years. Joined Beyond Autism about 9 months ago because I believe very much in early intervention, which is the philosophy of our team here. So in terms of who you are and what you'd like to take away from this session, I will be doing my best to be reflective of both a parent experience, educator experience, anybody that's education adjacent. So apologies if I'm sometimes a bit zoomed out. I'm trying to be broad in my recommendations here. If you have more specific needs, like I said, do get in touch. So, an introduction. What is ordinarily available provision? So you might see the abbreviation OAP, which doesn't stand for old age pensioner in the context of education. It's actually for ordinarily available provision. And if you were to Google that, you will get a definition that is on every local offer in every local authority in the land. They all differ slightly, but this is one I've just taken from Surrey, for example. So I'm not going to read it verbatim, but what it essentially says is that it's the school's ordinarily available approach to meeting young people's needs. That doesn't mean that the young person needs any sort of specific diagnosis. They don't need to have an EHCP, for example. These are the reasonable adjustments. So if you're familiar with the SEND Code of Practice and that phrase, reasonable adjustments that we are duty bound to offer, this is a sense of what those might be. So a few key facts. Sometimes you might hear the phrase quality first teaching. This is where we are assuming, or the powers that be are assuming that this adaptation will be built into a teacher's approach. Now that depends on training and support and all of those kind of things, which we'll come to. It might be phrased as environmental adjustments. So for example, are there access to resources or assistive technology that young people can have? So whether they have any type of neurodiversity, there is an opportunity for them to have a range of ways to access the learning. So that's another way it might be phrased. Staff training and awareness. There's a range. Schools are busy places. People are coming and going from different levels of experience. So ordinarily available provision is a wonderful idea, but part of what I'll be talking about today is how much training and awareness do staff have to implement that. It might also sometimes be the pastoral care and key relationships. So if you're a young person with additional needs, then you might have a person in the school who has a better understanding and grasp of your needs. That's wonderful and very important. Do they share what they know with the wider team? And that can sometimes be a point of conflict, which once again we'll come to. Now, the ordinarily available provision should be linked to the 4 areas of needs that are on the EHCP. But as I said, you don't need an EHCP to have access to ordinary available provision. But the 4 areas there are broadly what the adjustments will be defined against. I'm going to move a little bit faster now because I'm aware that I've lost a bit of time here. So solving the SEND crisis. You may have seen in the news that the Parliamentary Education Committee recently released a report with lots of recommendations. And I should stress they are recommendations at the moment. We don't know how much they'll be reflected in the changes that are enforced by the new government. But there's lots of recommendations within there, but I'm just going to pick up on this one, which is key, which I've borrowed from the special needs jungle here, that there should be a set of national standards around ordinarily available provision. So classically, there has been in SEN Code of Practice, a reasonable adjustment is expected, but that has not been defined what that looks like. It's been open to interpretation. Ordinarily available provision, once again, is the best practice. It's recommended in all local offers, but what does it actually look like? What the committee is saying is that we need to have a set of national standards that schools can be held to account or supported to deliver. And Ofsted's new framework also includes a new area on inclusion. So I think these two things will likely coincide. Now, just very briefly, the headlines from that report. One of the things the report has said is that inconsistency is a problem. And that's, when you're dealing with something as diverse as education across a range of communities, cohorts, size of setting, primary, secondary, special. Of course, there's inconsistency, but within those settings, for example, if you are a primary school, is there consistency from a young person's perspective if they go to one primary school in their local area or the next? Are they getting the same kinds of support? That's really what the committee are pointing towards. They've also said there's a need for clear, unified national framework/standards around this provision. So that's going to be, if you are an educator in the audience where you've had exemplar material when you've been moderating your English, for example, I think what we are looking at is very soon we're going to have exemplar material when it comes to inclusion, so that we can actually have examples to hold ourselves accountable against and to get support to achieve. Also, we're talking about providing support without waiting for a diagnosis, okay? The emphasis on inclusion being intrinsic, not additional. So what are we doing in proactively preempting what kind of neurodiversity might be in our classroom? We are not waiting for a year or 2 years of a young person's educational life before we start to make changes. We're going to bake into our practice what is most likely and what's proven to have the best outcomes for a neurodiverse group. And obviously we will tweak and course correct that with the young people we find in front of us. But we're not waiting for young people to tell us what their needs are. As educators, we need to be thinking about what is the best practice to help the majority. And then, of course, it's about accountability and enforceability, which is always a contentious area, but there does need to be an element of that if we are going to raise standards across the board. And obviously critical to this is resourcing. How are schools going to be helped to deliver that? How are they going to be trained? How are they going to be supported to make the kinds of changes environmentally or in terms of the culture in school to have that impact? That remains to be seen. So what do I mean by ordinarily available provision? And when I talk about reducing the baked-in barriers, I put a graphic up here to help you think about what inclusion really looks like. So sometimes we hear schools say, or any kind of environment say, oh, we're very inclusive, but that can sometimes mean very different things. So if we look at this graph, we can see, yes, exclusion is very obvious to see. When people with additional needs or a neurodiversity are not allowed into the room, then that is quite clearly exclusion. But what if they have their own separate room in the school where they go to have their learning, but they don't ever come into the main classroom? Then we might call that segregation. Is that really inclusion? It might be an improvement on exclusion, but is it where we want to be? Then you see integration, where we've got a group with additional needs being educated in their own way alongside neurotypical learners, which is once again an improvement. And then we have that full inclusion, where we have the kind of golden, the crack in the code there of delivering our learning in a way that everybody can access together, which is very challenging. And, it's something to aim towards, but it's difficult sometimes to put into practice, which is what I'm talking about today. So a couple of key points to think about. If you are an educator or a parent with a student in a school, think about how this is done for your young people. Are you collecting and reflecting? Are you listening to your young people's experience about how they feel integrated into classroom life? Do you have a good sense of how much belonging they feel within your classroom, school, or your alternative provision setting? How safe do they feel in that environment? And do they feel that they are being seen and heard? Matching the pedagogy to the pupil. So clearly, it's difficult to do an entirely different approach for every learner. But what we can do is think about the types of learners we may have in our class and think about the pedagogy that we are using to deliver our content. Are we offering a range of ways to access that? And are we being flexible? So reasonable adjustments coming in there. Now that differentiation should come in your policy. If you are a teacher that is feeling that you have to completely invent this approach within your school, then that indicates to me that you are not being supported by the infrastructure of an inclusive policy and provision for your school. Yeah. So by all means, make the changes within your classroom in the environment that you can, but have the conversations with leadership about the changes you're making and why you're making them. Okay, that should be a fair and equitable approach across the whole school. So it's great that I know lots of teachers that spend a lot of time going the extra mile for their students, but that should be the same across every classroom. There should not be a lottery for children with additional needs in your school. So does your policy have baked-in exclusionary sentences? For example, does it say things like children will always have their top button done up, regardless of the sensory experience that might provide for some young people? So we at BeyondAutism Outreach provide a consultancy offer where we help schools to unpick that, because it can be difficult to see. There may be wording and approaches that you're using that you don't feel are exclusionary. So sometimes having a third party to look those over or taking it out to the community of students and parents can really help you see those things that you haven't seen. Now, ordinarily available provision is part of a graduated approach. So what we mean by that is it's a step up from from a neurotypical offer. We are looking at making a graduated change to our environment. That does not mean that there is no need for EHCPs or there's no need for specialist support, but that would become further down the graduated approach when we have already tried some of the strategies that we know tend to have a positive impact for neurodiverse learners. that's when we would be looking to get that additional support. We should not be skipping over this step of reflecting on our ordinarily available provision. Okay, so some actual specifics then. I'm going to just apologize for the speed at which I'm talking, and I know I've got some questions to get to, so I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can. The graphic on the right that you're seeing is a kind of take on Maslow's hierarchy of need. If you are familiar with that, it was typically a pyramid about what people need in order to progress and to feel that they can develop in their life. Now, this is a take on that, where actually, rather than having it as a pyramid, if you think about the bottom three as the hull of a boat and the top three as the sail, it's no good. We cannot hope to use that sail if there are leaks in that bottom boat. So safety. Do our young people feel that they are in an environment where they are safe and are nurtured and people understand what their needs? Connection. Do they feel part of that community? Do they feel a sense of belonging? And self-esteem. Do they know what they're good at? Yeah. If you have a young person who is coming to school every day dreading a particular subject because they really feel inadequate in that area, what are we doing to address that so that it doesn't bleed across all of the areas that they are strong in, and we're not sacrificing their progress because of a perceived need to do well in English or maths or whatever it might be? So how do we approach that for our young people? How do we be realistic, effective? How do we have high impact with low cost, right? These are the magic words that I would always hear when I was working for the local authority. How do we do this without having to completely change the way we operate? So attitude, first of all. Is the attitude in your classroom curious, not furious? Are we seeking to understand our young people and better learn about their needs and where they're coming from? Yeah. Are we having those conversations where we're asking them how their experience has been that day and not just focusing on the negative or focusing on the areas of conflict? Routines are good for everyone. Okay, we often hear the preconceived idea about young people with autism is that they have to have a strict routine, and that is true for a lot of people with autism, but actually most people like a routine. So how do we explore that routine in the classroom, in the school? How is it explained? How are changes to it communicated? These are things that should be thought about for the whole group. Yes, you can have a visual timetable for a learner with additional needs, but actually how life changes. How do we communicate change to routine? That is something that should be thought about via your ordinarily available provision. So clearly defined communication. What's the communication policy in your setting, in your school? Is if a young person has done something that doesn't need addressing, is the policy that you have to address it there and then and they have to say sorry straight away? Or is there a neurodiverse understanding of the way people explore that feeling and deal with emotions and deal with dysregulation? So if a young person is struggling, do they know how to communicate that to you? And do they have a good sense of how their options to communicate that to you? Be it verbal, be there, another low-cost way. For example, sometimes people have a card on the table, or they might come ask to see you outside. Have you made that explicit? Don't ask our learners to figure that out for themselves. Make it clear. There's lots of sensory things we can do. So, for example, with dyslexia, there are certain fonts that are better for young people with dyslexia. So let's use those fonts as standard. We don't have to make those young people feel other by giving them a separate print off. Can we use those fonts as standard to make everybody feel that's just par for the course, that we're changing our environment to help everybody? Chunking. So when I say chunking, that's about how and when we deliver the learning. Okay, we don't need to lower expectations. I would go into a lot of schools where there were young people who had ADHD or autism, and everyone was asked to do a page and they were asked to do a few sentences, when actually what they needed was, you can do a page, but you're going to do it 5 minutes and then you're going to take a break, 5 minutes, take a break. So can we change the way that we are delivering and the way we're expecting that work to be presented? It does not have to be a lower expectation, although that a young person might need that scaffolding. It can actually be the manner in which we ask for that work to be presented. So that leads me into that next point about alternative ways to present thinking. We are living in a world now where technology is really helping people to clarify their thoughts. We have AI, we have tablets, we have various ways, mind maps, things like that. So how are we asking our young people to record their work? Is everyone being expected to do it in exactly the same way, regardless of how their brain works? Have we looked into that? Because there is a lot of work you can do to reduce the friction with your young people in terms of getting producing the thinking that they are having. Movement breaks, something that's often done reactively for young people who might need that. Why don't we all do it? It's very good. There's so much science to show that the human body needs to move around in order for the brain to work effectively. So let's build it into our timetable. That's what I mean by ordinarily available provision. Rather than having 5 different movement break plans for 5 students, try and build it into your whole class or your whole school and see if you can catch everybody and give everybody that support to show that it's not an othering thing. It's actually something we can all benefit from. And tech solutions used responsibly. And the reason I put that in there is because, yes, some young people gravitate towards a device, but they also need to be given the opportunity to use a range of materials. So just because they work better with a tablet doesn't mean that that's the only thing we should ever give them. So we do also have to be thinking about the long-term outcomes for those young people. Okay, I've only got 7 minutes left and I've got some questions to go through. So I'm going to move on to those now. So these have come in from a variety of people, and I had some really interesting questions, and I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them, but I will do my best to get back to you all. So this first one came in from a primary teacher. How can I balance the needs of my SEND learners with those of the wider class without relying on support staff or stretching myself too thinly? So I chose that question out of the bunch because I think this reflects a lot of people's experience as teachers. We so badly want to support the learners who need our expertise, but we also have the rest of those young people to think about. So the first thing I would say to that is make explicit how you're spending your time. Don't deliver the lesson and then run off and try and do another lesson to your SEND learners. Think about the structure of it, yeah? And if you want to split your time, build that into your lesson plan. So if you have a general input for the majority of the class, tell them that you're going to ask them to think about that, talk partners, do a starter or whatever it might be, and say, I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes working with this group. Okay, and give them that responsibility so that everybody's working together to meet each other's needs. We're not doing it in secret. It's not an addition. It's part of the structure. Yeah. If you don't build that time in for yourself, then you'll have to scrape it out whatever you've got left. And that isn't always available. So sometimes our SEND learners who really need our help actually only get a couple of minutes because something came up in the input and there were some questions and we got sidetracked. They have to be included in a way that they know they're going to get that time if that's part of it. And that part about support staff is key because so often the solution to that lots of teachers understandably go to is to put a member of support staff with them all of the time. And that's not to knock support staff who do an incredible job for our young people, but they haven't necessarily got the qualifications to explain that learning in the way that a teacher does. So the person with the highest expertise and the most teaching experience should be prioritizing time to spend with those that need that expertise the most. Switch it around. Can your support staff lead the lesson while you do some work with your SEND group? So I hope that helps you to clarify some thinking on that, but there's lots more I could say on that. So this one is a really sad and common one from an anonymous parent. So parents, please for help, sometimes ignored if the child shows no need in school. Is more awareness training being given in relation to masking? Just because a child appears to cope during the school day, if they are academic, for example, doesn't mean adjustments aren't needed. So I've seen a lot of this where, particularly in girls, but it's not always girls, there's a capacity within the young person with ASD to mask all of their sensory or other triggers until they get home, and then it all comes up in a kind of eruption. And that's, I would always say this to parents, that shows that home is their safe place and that they really trust you to understand how to respond to that. So it's not necessarily a negative. They have done an amazing job by staying focused in school all that day. But we don't obviously want them to be having a negative experience at school and not feeling that they can communicate that struggle to their support staff, to their teachers. So I would say my response to that is about trying to dissolve that barrier between home and school as these completely separate environments with completely separate expectations. So if you have a really good relationship with that young person and you're seeing no behaviors at school, then you should be confident in talking to them about what's going on at home and what could we do at school to help you feel less explosive at the end of the day. Yeah, help them to identify the feeling. You might do that sometimes through meditation or some proprioception exercises where we're doing body scanning, for example. There's lots of things we can do, and we have an online course about masking as well, a lunch and learn about masking, which you can find. But we have to make it explicit. We have to help that young person identify those feelings throughout the day and start to find pushing them down. So it's about having those conversations. And if you're a parent in that situation and a school is saying to you, well, we don't see it here, then that's not good enough because it's happening and it's real for that young person. So if you can find a way for that, for your young person to tell them, whether it's writing something down or recording a voice note so that they're hearing it from the young person, then they can't avoid that, their responsibility to help you explore that further. Right, I've got 2 minutes left and I've got one more question, so I'm going to go very quickly. What are the best ways for educators to work with parents and external professionals to help with provision, particularly when we're not in alignment on what needs to be done? So I spent a lot of my career in situations like this, and I would say the first thing that you need to do is we need to get people in a room together and we need to go around and ask everybody what we feel the best outcome is. And I would be very surprised if everybody in that room does not want that young person to feel happy, cared for, safe, and learning and thriving in their school setting. So if we all agree on those outcomes, then the next question is, right, well, what do you think needs to happen for that to be the case and why? So then we can explain our thinking and rationale. And sometimes parents can think that schools are just trying to cut down on time and resources and money, and it's all about moving on, and that might not be the case. So hear each other's thinking, and sometimes schools can get themselves into a position where they think that parents are being unreasonable and they want everything, and they're not listening to the school's limitations on what they have in terms of resourcing staff and environment, and that's also valid. So we have to create an environment where those things can be discussed openly so that we can start to understand each other. If we can't understand each other and listen to each other, then how can we expect our young people to do that and to be self-aware enough to reflect on their own needs? So we have to model that as parents and educators and carers and make sure that we're doing that in a way that then trickles down to everybody feeling like, even if we have different opinions about how to get there, we at least agree on where we're trying to get to. That's the first step. Right, it is the end of our session. So in summary, I'm not going to have time to go over that, but hopefully you found that useful. Hopefully you have a better understanding of what ordinarily available provision is. And as I said, if you would like to make more, have more of a discussion with me, please do reach out to us. We can book in a time to do that. If you found the webinar useful, our next one is on October the 8th, and you can use that QR code to reach out to us or email us at outreach@beyondautism.org.uk. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I very much look forward to seeing you soon.